Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome. As people start to trickle in, we're going to play ULI Toronto's new membership video as everyone gets settled.
One of the staff members at ULI Toronto came to speak at Ryerson University, and I just thought, this is a great way to network and to meet people and to learn more about my city as well, because they put on such great programming.
To me, ULI has been a crucial part of my career development. 4 years ago in Kensington Market, there was a ULI walking tour where I met a senior city planner, and we developed a strong working relationship.
That's a great thing about ULI, is the opportunity to be with like-minded people in the industry. I've personally hired people from running into them at ULI and led to a conversation, and it grew into an opportunity to join our company.
There are just so many opportunities for people of all ages to get involved as volunteers or just to attend the events and get involved.
Great about ULI is if there's that someone you've been wanting to meet and you haven't had the opportunity to do so, the roster of members is open. Take a look at who the members are. If that person's on the list, ask one of the ULI staff and they will make the introduction.
Conversations that are happening, everything from the technology side of the business and incorporating new tech into development and urban planning.
That's rare to have that kind of an entity that can convene conversations from a whole variety of perspectives so that we can kind of push and challenge each other to think a little differently about the solutions that might make a lot of sense.
Now that I've been a part of ULI for 7 years and then I volunteered for ULI, I hardly go by without going to an event and not knowing one person. And sometimes I actually find that there isn't enough time during the network portion of an event to talk to everybody that I know there.
Join ULI to connect with people in the industry, to grow your career, and to give back.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Spanier, president of the Spanier Group and former chair of ULI Toronto's Management and Advisory Board. It is my distinct pleasure to kick off ULI Toronto's annual Fireside Chat and to welcome you all to this afternoon's program, Fireside Chat with Jane Pepino in conversation with Steve Zakem. Incredibly, this year marks our 13th annual Fireside Chat event. Obviously, the format has been changed for the times we are in, but we are pleased to have you join us virtually. In the tradition of ULI Toronto's annual Fireside Chats, Jane Pepino will offer an unvarnished perspective of over 4 decades of real estate development and her journey as a pioneering legal giant in our industry in a candid one-on-one conversation with her colleague and longtime friend Steve Zakem, managing partner at Aird Berlis. As a Toronto region-based organization, we acknowledge the land we are meeting on virtually. It is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishwaabek, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, and newcomers in this generation or generations past. We'd like to also acknowledge and honor those who came here involuntarily, particularly those who are descended from those brought here through enslavement. To better understand the meaning behind land acknowledgement, I recommend a program that ULI hosted with Shared Path over this past summer. 13,000 years of Indigenous history in the GTA and why it matters to planning and development, and more recently, Whose Land and Whose Law. The links will be both posted in the chat. So before we get started, a few housekeeping items. 1, everyone will be automatically muted throughout the session to ensure any audio interference. Closed captioning is available. There might be a slight delay and it might not be 100% accurate, so please be patient. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function or upvote questions by presenting the thumbs up button. So during the Q&A session, I'll be choosing from those questions, so make sure to get those in. This is a recorded session. The recording will be sent to you after the session. And finally, if you want to take the conversation online, please tag us with the handle @ULI Toronto or with the hashtag #AskGreatQuestions. Today's event and all other ULI programming would not be possible without the support of our annual sponsors. I'd like to say a major thank you to all of them for their support. Now more than ever, ULI Toronto relies on the support of our sponsors who allow us to put on the quality programming we do and drive our mission to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. So to all of them, we say thank you. So with much to cover, it is my pleasure to introduce Steve Zakem as this year's interviewer of our guest, Jane Pepino. Steve is widely recognized as an expert in municipal planning. He uses his deep understanding of the real estate market and strong interpersonal skills to guide clients through complex municipal regulations and multiple layers of city officials, staff, and politicians. Steve is the firm's managing partner and a member of the Municipal and Land Planning Group. His municipal practice is primarily devoted to land use planning matters involving residential, commercial, and industrial properties. He advises a broad range of private and public sector clients on practical solutions that are suited to their tolerance for risk and appetite for opportunity. Steve has appeared before local municipal planning bodies and has extensive experience in appearing before the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, formerly the Ontario Municipal Board. He has been a member of the Executive Committee since 2011. While Steve is Jane's colleague and longtime friend, and such, I believe he is the perfect person to facilitate such an intriguing conversation. Before I hand it over to Steve, I want to thank Jane personally for agreeing to do this. I have known Jane professionally for over 10 years now, and I am proud to say that I am the one who convinced Jane to join ULI Toronto as part of our advisory board many years ago. I was also tasked to make the ask to have Jane be this year's Fireside Chat featured guest. While Jane says no to many people, I am humbled that once again she agreed to my request with very little pushback. If you've ever sat across from Jane on any matter, you would know what I mean by pushback. Jane, your knowledge and experience in the industry is unparalleled, but it is your commitment and care for our industry and our community that I admire most. I am truly looking forward to sitting back and enjoying this moment today. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks very much, Rob, for that kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank ULI for putting on this event each year and for inviting us to do what I understand will be the first ever virtual ULI Fireside Chat. Aird Berlis is a proud member of ULI, and a number of our colleagues are joining you today for this event. It's an honor for me to facilitate this conversation with Jane. Simply put, there's no more recognizable name in municipal law than Jane Pepino, who founded the Aird Berlis Municipal Land Use Planning Group in 1982. Jane's experience of more than 45 years means there's little she hasn't seen before, and her strategic and flexible approach puts her clients on the best possible footing to face the factors that are beyond their control. Jane has been widely recognized for her contribution to healthcare governance, public service, volunteer work, and her community involvement generally. She is founder of the firm's Municipal and Land Use Planning Group, which now has 21 lawyers and 4 planners. Her practice includes providing advice on all aspects of the statutory scheme for planning, zoning, and land development throughout Ontario, as well as on a broad range of municipal and provincial licensing and other regulatory matters. She advises governments, landowners, lenders, as well as community groups, ratepayers associations. Jane's clients include regional governments, as well as local government agencies, as well as large development corporations and small landowners. She regularly appears before various decision-making bodies that control land development, including planning committees and councils, conservation authorities, and LPAT, or the OMB, LPAT, or Land Tribunals of Ontario, whatever it's called today, and the courts. By way of background on our relationship, Jane took a chance on me 28 years ago and hired me as an associate at Aird Berlis, and since that time she has trained and mentored me for my entire career, and in the process has become a dear friend. Jane has been the single most important and positive influence in my professional development. I'm excited to facilitate this opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about Jane. There's so much ground we could cover in what is truly an extraordinary life and career, with still some more chapters to be written. So Jane, we're not writing you off yet. Jane, I want to start with a little bit personal information. You were born in London, Ontario, as the eldest of 3 children with 2 younger brothers. Your father was an engineer who obtained his PhD and had a number of inventions and patents to his name. Your mother was a physiotherapist who continued to work while raising the 3 of you. Your parents divorced when you were in grade 13. And this was also during the 1960s, which was a time of great social upheaval. How did your parents' divorce and when it happened shape you as a person?
I think it made me more independent and recognizing that I was having to forge a slightly, in those days, non-traditional path for myself. Divorce was quite rare. The other thing was that it, I think, underscored the importance of staying in touch with family and trying to build a strong family if possible. But most importantly, I think I saw my mother fend for herself in a way that was a continuation, but really deepened her commitment to not just her profession, which she loved and she was very good at, but also to volunteer work. And so from that perspective, I saw her really make a life for herself as an individual, raising, in that case, my two brothers. I was off to university at that point. So some good examples, and there's always a silver lining, things to learn from bad situations.
And you did 2 years of undergrad at Vic College at U of T, and then entered law school, Osgoode Hall Law School at the age of, I believe, 19.
That's right.
And that's when Osgoode Hall was actually at Osgoode Hall, downtown Toronto, right?
That's right. There were dinosaurs wandering the grounds.
Right. The cattle gates, as the urban legend goes. You graduated in 1970 from law school. Why did you choose to go to law school? What drove you to go to law school?
It was a combination of understanding, again, from my mother, that a general BA, even an honors BA, wasn't going to necessarily set me on a path. And although I enjoyed my English studies very much, I just thought I wanted to have something that was specific. And it was almost on a whim that I applied to law school with a friend, but it also had a number of things that were really intriguing to me. There was the whole issue of advocacy. There was the issue that you could learn how to become a better citizen. There was an issue that you could help people in whatever role you were taking. And I also thought, well, it's worth a flyer. If I really like it, great. And if I don't, it's pretty good general education that I could apply elsewhere.
And at this time, you were I'm sure as a woman in law school, there weren't as many as there are today. I think today it's more than 50% of all students in law school are women. Back in the day when you went to Osgoode, how many students were there in your class, and what kind of challenges did you face being a woman in what was then a male-dominated class?
Well, there were over 300 in the first year. You know, the old thing, first day they sat us down and said, look to your left, look to your right. One of you won't be here next year. And that turned out to be true. There were 10 women originally registered, and within a couple of months, one of the women transferred out to UBC. And it was strange. There were 10 women in my year, and 10 the year before that, and 10 the year before that. But boy, nobody would acknowledge that there perhaps was a quota on women being admitted. Some of the challenges included classmates who came right up to me and said, you don't deserve to be here. All you're going to do is go and have a family, and you're not going to use your degree. And we have a friend who should have come with us. We planned since high school that the four of us would all be in law school, and he didn't make it, and you've got his place. So there was that. And I think there was also, because it was so unusual, and sexual harassment was, quite common and accepted, there were people just hitting on you in one way or another. They either didn't want you there, or they didn't want you there just as a classmate. That said, I made some wonderful friends who were very supportive, who've remained friends to this day. So it was what it was.
And you then went on and did after you graduated from law school, you went and did your Master's of Law at University of Texas.
Yes.
How did you get to University of Texas?
Yeah, fair question. I was really, really interested by the time I graduated in advocacy, and I knew I was going to be a litigator. And one of the burgeoning areas of law, this is a sign of how long ago it was the whole issue of foreseeability in torts. And the person who had written the book and was doing the research in that was a guy named Paige Keaton, who was the dean at the University of Texas Law School, whose brother at the same time was the dean of Harvard Law School. So I applied, again, not on a whim, but just to say, well, it was more a flyer than a win. And I got accepted. And so I was able to study with Paige Keaton, and I did my thesis, and I came back and I never did that area of law again. But that's a whole different story.
It's all right. Can never learn too much. And then you were called to the bar in 1973, and I wanted just to assure our viewers, I'm going to fast forward here for really soon, but I think the early part of your career is important and interesting. You were called to the bar in 1973, and then went into practice. And what when you went into practice, did you immediately, where did you article, and how did your articling experience draw you towards land use planning law?
I was articling for a firm called Thomson Rogers, which at that point had a very strong litigation department. And there were a couple of senior lawyers there who were very active in the area that I was very interested in: medical malpractice, foreseeability, negligence. But Thomson Rogers, as any law firms required to do, put students through a rotation. And so I got put into the municipal rotation. I went, oh, geez, I don't know what that is. I hadn't taken municipal law. I hadn't taken planning law. There were very few courses that were even offered in those days. So whatever was on offer, I wasn't interested in. But I was assigned to work with Robert Macaulay. That's Bob Macaulay, the lawyer, not his nephew, the planner. And he had just left government as one of the really first and pioneering ministers of municipal affairs and housing. And he was an extraordinary individual and just basically threw me in. You know, I was just in the deep end. I had never read the Planning Act. I didn't know there was a Planning Act and a Municipal Board Act and a Municipal Act. So it was very much learning as I went, but I loved it. It was all the litigation I wanted, all the advocacy I wanted, really important public policy issues wrapped up in politics. It was just made for me. And so I never left the rotation. I spent all the rest of my articles doing that with Bob Macaulay and the department that he had put together. And I was the only student hired back. Within 4 months of being hired back after bar ads, however, my senior, a man named Bob Jarvis, who just died about a year and a half ago, he and 3 others announced they were leaving Thomson Rogers to set up their own boutique firm, and they invited me to go with them. And I kind of took a deep breath and thought, well, I've tied my star to that wagon, and so I went with them.
And the firm was known as Jarvis Blott,
Fair Pepino, and I had 1/2 of 1%, but I was on the letterhead.
All right. In 1974, you married James Pearson, who unfortunately passed away this past November. You have 3 wonderful children, Drew, Blaine, and Tori, who I believe might be even listening today. And if they are, I say hello. One of my favorite stories is around the announcement of the birth of Drew at a time when these announcements were routinely published in the paper. And it says a lot about the times you were living through. Could you just relay that story to our
1978, my first child, Drew, was born, and I wanted to put in the standard birth announcement, but I had kept my own name. And the Globe and Mail couldn't cope with that. They couldn't cope with having, Pearson and Pepino in the same. So I did, thankfully I was, in those days, you're in hospital for 5 days, so I had a lot of time to spend on the phone with these people. And we ended up sawing it off where they allowed us how they would put my name in with my husband's, but they used small font for my name. So the bold font was Pearson, and then I had a little tiny Pepino after that. We were able to announce Drew's birth, and 19 months later when his sister was born and I went back to the Globe, they had fixed their problem. There was no issue about having double names and having it in the same degree of font. Right. So I took that as a tiny, tiny, tiny step ahead.
Great. Canada's national newspaper had come to adulthood. That's great. And after you joined the firm, or you started your own firm, and you got married. There's a funny story about the letterhead at the time.
Oh.
At the time of people your age and mine will remember a time when all the lawyers, or the partners at least, were listed on letterhead, and of course you were on the letterhead. You want to just tell that story? I quite like that one too.
After I became engaged and announced to my partners that I was getting married in a month's time, they kind of said, "Oh, congratulations, that's wonderful. What are you going to call yourself?" Because it was also very traditional that women would take their husband's name. And I said, "Well, I thought I'd keep my own name." And they said, "Oh, thank God, we just ordered 10,000 sheets of letterhead." So I was able to satisfy their need as well as my own.
That's great. And of course, that was a day when you ordered letterhead in batches of the thousands as well. Yeah. So if as if a Bay Street practice and 3 children were not enough, you've always been involved in public service, volunteerism throughout your career, and certainly as long as I've known you. How did you first get involved in public service as a young lawyer?
I'd always been active in student politics and the like, and was a bit of a joiner from that perspective. But when I was just starting out in about 1970, I'm trying to even remember. Bottom line is, Roy McMurtry was the Attorney General at that time, and Roy, as people who know him, was a feminist. He'd appointed Rosie Abella to the courts when she was pregnant and 35 or 36 years old. And I had met Roy through one of my classmates who was articling with him. And he appointed me to the Human Rights Commission in 1980. And that was really interesting for me because it was my first sort of grown-up appointment. And it was at a time when issues of sexual harassment, of gender being a protected, gender and sex being a protected category under the Act were just starting to come into play. So that got me started in an order in council appointment. And then within 2 years of that, there had been a really bad summer where there had been a lot of police violence and tension with the Black community in Toronto. And so Roy called and asked whether I would consider becoming a member of the Metropolitan Toronto Commissioners of Police. And he said to me, "You know, you'd be the first woman." And I said, "Well, you know, that's okay. That's not, I'm used to that kind of." And so we talked it through, and he pointed to the fact that I had been on the Human Rights Commission, one of the founding members of the Race Relation Division. And it was clear to me that he wanted to make not only a change, but also symbolize the commitment and the direction. So I said yes, and it was a really wonderful experience. I learned a ton. It was trying at times. There were really difficult issues, but it was just, it felt like I was able to make a small contribution. And through that, then we had a terrible summer where Paul Bernardo, we now know, was the Scarborough rapist, and Paul Godfrey, who was chair of Metro Toronto at that point, asked me as a fellow member of the police commission to undertake a public inquiry, an advisory role, and to reporting on ways to avoid and deal with violence against women and children. And that then led me into other things as well. So I was just lucky. I was in the right place at the right time when somebody asked. And one of the things I've learned over my life is you've got to be willing to say yes when those things occur, because wonderful doors can open.
Does your involvement in one particular organization or stand out as among the others? I know that's a tough question, but
I had sort of parallel paths, but they did join up. One path was to speak on behalf of and be an advocate for women, children, and from that perspective into more marginalized groups. Although because I'm only a woman and I'm not in other marginalized groups, I didn't feel comfortable necessarily speaking for those groups, but rather trying to open a dialogue. Parallel to that, the whole issue of safety and health led me into being invited to sit on the board of Women's College Hospital. And I've chaired that place twice, and I've been a longtime board member. It is a passion of mine, and just the whole issue of women's health research, service to women, not only in providing care, but also ensuring that women become leaders in medical care and medical research, simply because that changes the dialogue and that changes the understanding. And also, I know that women constantly are pushing for the necessary public policy changes to make things better for themselves and those around them. So all of those things have been very important to me, and they're both thematic, but I think I'd have to say that Women's College has been it for me as one of the biggest things.
And I was fortunate to be at the firm when you were going through that, and it was a very interesting time. I remember it was during the Harris government and the various cutbacks and restructuring of many of the hospitals. And you served 2 terms. You can only serve 2 terms as chair of the board, and then of course you came back later and served 2 more terms. And during that process, as I recall, Women's College was merged with or reorganized together with Sunnybrook, and then can you just describe a bit of what happened, the arc of what happened, and that led to what is now a brand new hospital building, and then it's still an independent institution?
Well, in fact, it was worse than that. Originally, Women's College was supposed to be closed. And we pushed really hard. There were demonstrations on the lawn of Queen's Park. There were petitions. I worked the back rooms. We started litigation. And in order to settle the litigation 3.5 years in, it was acknowledged that we would remain a hospital under the Hospital Act. We would be partnered with Sunnybrook and became Sunnybrook and Women's, but we would remain whole and not independent, but identifiable. So it was I never accepted the word merger, because to me, merger means the 2 things come together and the original parts disappear. It was always Sunnybrook and Women's. It was a difficult time because the cultures were very different, and the mandates were different in many ways. There was much similarity as well. But suffice to say that by the time I left the board of Sunnybrook and Women's, there was a new group of women behind me, and they worked very hard over the next 4 or 5 years to secure a commitment from the then opposition party to put independence for Women's College into their political platform. And Dalton McGuinty got elected, and Dalton McGuinty followed through on his promise to allow Women's College pure independence. That's when I went back to help them plan a new building and to get it reset after that building was done. So it was a bit of a retread, but it was lovely to be there when she rose like a phoenix from the ashes.
That's right. It was a long process too.
Yeah.
So just want to talk about what I'm sure many people on the call are interested in is some questions about the development industry. You've seen a lot of changes in the course of 45 plus years. Yeah, what are some of the more profound ones that you've seen, good and bad?
I think over the arc of that time, and you were kind enough, I'm using air quotes here to point out that my 45 years have spanned 6 different decades.
Right.
We've gone from basically very few rules, just, official plans that were 12 pages and a map. And when I first started, a lot of municipalities, certainly north of Highway 9, didn't even have official plans. So we've gone from that, where the whole approach by some developers was how to kind of make those few rules work for them and work their way around because there wasn't a lot of regulation, to now where I think there's far too much regulation. My operating mandate or mantra rather is that a pendulum never rests in the middle. It's always swinging too far in one direction or the other. I think we didn't have enough control in the early days. I mean, for example, it wasn't until probably the late 70s, early 80s that official plans actually recognized things like rivers and ravines. That was always under the jurisdiction of the conservation authorities after Hurricane Hazel. So it was important, I think, to bring those things together and to start to look at things much more holistically. But today, I challenge anyone to pick up 569/2013 and put a pin through any particular clause and tell me within 40 seconds what it means. It's like there's some sort of sedimentary accretion of regulation and exception and cross-referencing. Nothing is simple. We spend time now helping clients not try to get around the rules, but try to figure out how to at least adhere to the rules, and the process has become utterly unwieldy. The City of Toronto has both not enough people to do the work, but also too many regulations and things to go, processes to go through, that you don't need that same number of people. I don't know how the reset button's going to be pushed, however. I mean, some people point to British Columbia, well, any other province that doesn't have an Ontario Municipal Board or an LPAD or a TLAB. They just deal with the municipality. And I suppose that is the ideal case, because everybody has to act like a grown-up then and take responsibility and cooperate and reach consensus. I don't know how we would transition from where we are at the moment through to that, and I'm not sure that's nirvana either. Somewhere in between, I think there has to be an opportunity to push a number of reset buttons with the approaches. I think that having broad policy led from the provincial level is fundamentally important, because you push down in one municipality, it's going to pop up in another. We do have regional transportation. We absolutely have to look at hard infrastructure. Just think of the York-Durham servicing scheme and the big pipe. That was around 25, 30 years ago, and now it's coming back into play again to allow growth to continue in Simcoe. So there are these things that absolutely have to be done up at the top level, but there's such an accretion down below that there's, I'm hoping the pendulum starts to reverse direction.
Yeah, I'm interested in the course of my 30-year career, one of the things that really struck me as I was learning about planning and practicing was we call it land use planning, and yet I felt that planning was always reactive.
Yes.
There wasn't a lot of planning actually going on, and in many respects, the development industry led planning in Ontario. LEED certification is one example that springs to mind. The development of townhouses and rear lanes and those sorts of things, the back to the future kind of thing. But so I think the development industry has been very innovative and actually forward thinking. What's your view on the connection between public policy and private development? I'm thinking of things like rent control, affordable housing, the green belt, the ORM. There's always been that tension. You've got some comments on that in the course of your career?
Right. I think things like the green belt and the Oak Ridges Moraine, as two examples, were necessary, because there is always, and certainly back then, not so much now, but back then, people said, it's my land, I can do what I want with it, back off. And the burgeoning understanding from the Crombie Commission is one good example, that everything is linked to everything else as far as certainly environmental systems go, was fundamentally important, and no individual municipality could do it, and there were a certain attitude among some of the developers that they didn't care and they didn't have to anyway. You can't make me. So they had to be made. The other thing, however, is that, to your point, I think that developers have taken a tremendous lead. Not only the examples that you've mentioned, but for example, mass timber construction and getting the building code changed. reduce parking standards in order I remember going 15 years ago and saying at a hearing, you can spit and hit a subway. Why is my client being asked to provide 1.25 or 1.4 parking spaces? So those were things where the industry drove what I think is now accepted wisdom. And with respect to rent controls, Mike Harris brought rent controls in for what was a good reason at that point, both political and I think policy, frankly. And what our industry's been able to do is to make the best of it. There is now a niche within the industry who looks at long-term cash flow, can be capitalized 25, 30, 35 years out as being a really good thing. Think about the income trusts and all those sorts of things. And with the stability of knowing that rents will be protected and projected, there are some people who are doing very well by that right now. I acknowledge it's not affordable housing. And I also acknowledge that today we're all grappling with the implications for the move to inclusionary zoning on a mandatory basis. I don't think that's necessarily going to end well, but I think if people can share their interests, but also understand where the checkpoints are and the pinch points and the pain points for the industry and what it is that they can and can't do, hopefully we'll be able to work something through. So all of which goes to say, it's politics and public policy is the water that this industry swims in. We breathe it every day, and maybe like a fish, we don't even notice that we're doing it. Integrally linked. And I do see it as a two-way street as well, because this industry is nothing but innovative. And if we need to get change to make sense, then things like build, like ULI, like CUI, pinpoint it and start to socialize it with government.
When you mentioned rent controls, you mentioned Mike Harris. You meant to say Bill Davis. I think brought it in, not Mike Harris. Mike Harris loosened, of course,
loosened some, but that was to me, that was the reset. That was the reset for people being able to actually, under certain circumstances, make a go of it.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, and we've seen in the past number of years substantial amounts of rental housing being built in for years there was nothing built. For 30 years nothing was built, and more recently you're seeing a lot of it, including some projects I know you worked on not too far from where I live, which was supposed to originally be
and they're beautiful buildings, Stephen. Beautiful buildings.
They're very nice.
Yeah.
I've got just a few more questions. So if people have questions for Jane, you don't often get a chance. Most of you are questioned by her, but if you've got questions, please put them in the chat and we'll take them up. I know, Jane, from speaking to you, that you had been approached in the past to run for public office. You were a red Tory, as they said in the day, a Bill Davis Tory. You've been asked to run. You've been asked to apply to be a judge. Why have you not followed through on either of those opportunities?
Well, my flip answer, particularly with respect to municipal politics and running for mayor of the city of Toronto, is, do I look like a woman with a death wish? Truly, however, I did think about it very seriously from time to time, because it's an alluring life. I mean, it's just there's a draw. From a public policy perspective, I do believe still that there's an opportunity to influence policy from the outside. It's like, you can just keep at people, and you're not constrained by party politics or by having to meet an election process. So you have an opportunity, I think, to be more able to base actions and beliefs and all of that on values and on beliefs. You're not constrained. And secondly, with respect to the judge, if I'd ever seen a really bad cross-examination, I would have kind of gone, oh, that wasn't very good. Here, let me ask some questions. Mm-hmm. I love I love what I do so much. I love the hearings. I love the negotiations. I love the mediations. I love all of that. I didn't want to leave it behind. So simple, but I was being pretty self-indulgent too.
I think you had the right to. Do you have any sort of advice or parting comments for people with respect to the industry in general, the development industry, the planning, planning community? Any sort of thought, any sort of profound thoughts from a career that spanned so many years?
I think that although our industry has always dealt with, quote, community, that's generally in the past meant ratepayer groups, my sense is that one of the things we're going to need to do, and we've already started to do in I believe, a fairly obvious way, is to embrace ESG, the environment, social, and governance issues, and to ensure that we are also hitting, as part of environmental, the whole matter of the climate change and the crisis in sustainability. That's social sustainability for sure, but when you just look at the sinkholes that are opening up, the fact that Collingwood put in an ICBL a couple of weeks ago because they say, and I'm sure it's more nuanced than that they can't service development with water anymore. Those are challenges that are real for the industry. And unless we start to get out ahead of those things and build that sort of stuff into our planning, I don't think that the industry is going to be able to maximize its impact and maximize its return. And as part of that, the whole issue of community, I think, is getting much more granular. We're now talking about the 15-minute city. We're talking about MTSAs and intensification and transit, and frankly, equity, because we don't want to have neighborhoods or municipalities hollowed out because people can't live there. We don't want neighborhoods left any longer that are food deserts. And now with COVID, we've discovered that Jane Finch is not only a food desert, it's a pharmacy desert. That's not right. And unless, and let me put it differently, let me put my developer hat on, there are opportunities in that. It's not just to do the right thing, but doing the right thing can be a good thing for everyone concerned, including dropping to the bottom line. You think of just trying to intensify the towers in the park, very common that people are doing it now, makes great sense, and there's a good return in it. So I think those are the things we're going to have to start to be thinking about much more, is granularity of our planning and responding to ESG initiatives and continuing to lead, to get public policy and those bloody regulations to recognize that there have to be changes and that there has to be the ability to be far more nimble than I think the process is at the moment. I'm really praying that in the next decade, the pendulum's going to swing back a little bit into making things easier and more certain.
And just to bring it full circle to the start of our conversation about a young woman going into law school, and when it wasn't common, and the development industry, one thinks of it as sort of a construction. You think of it as a man's game, but I know that the department you've built here at the firm has 21 lawyers in it. 10 of them are women. 11 of us are men. I think of Julie DeLorenzo and Lucy Stocco and other women leading in the development industry. And when I look around, I see that the development industry is actually quite, seems to be quite open to and welcoming of women. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, and just think of the membership video that was shown. There was Katerina Sliwa, there was Emma West, who's got a senior role at ULI. Absolutely. I think this industry now, I remember going to meetings with guys who were they just come from the field because they were checking on their subdivision. And that a lot of the wonderful, big, powerful firms now were started 45 years ago by people who had a pickup truck and, you know, we're pouring concrete. I think now it's much more knowledge-based business, much more sophisticated. Planners are integral now to every big development and development corporation, and women are taking natural roles in that. We care about where we live and how our families live, and I think the industry is much more progressive than it was, and much more sophisticated. So I'm very comfortable now. I don't have to fight any battles any longer the way I did 45 years ago. I was called a lawyerette in my second year of practice. That cut quick.
Yeah.
Nobody would do that now. They wouldn't even think about it. So you live
Not to
long
your,
enough.
not to your face anyway.
You live
Rob,
long enough, good things happen, you know?
Jane, I appreciate you asking me to be the interviewer today. It's always a pleasure, and it's great to see you again. Rob, I'll turn it over to you, and thanks again to ULI for giving me and Jane this opportunity.
Yeah, this was amazing, and thank you both for incredible conversation, dialogue, and really just, you know, chatting with 164 of your closest friends. Before I get into the questions, and there are a lot of them, and again, please don't forget to upvote your questions because they go to the top. I want to sort of send out a special note to you, Jane, from Blaine Pearson. Not a question, but just wanted to say that all three of us kids are watching and want you to know we are so proud of you. You've been an endlessly inspiring role model to us all. Thank you. We love you. Not to mention, that's not the only one. You know, there's so many notes here that are just saying thank you, a sincere thank you for being the incredible human I know you to be. I have learned so much from you. And so it's so amazing to hear, you know, people don't have this opportunity to really hear the real Jane Pepino because they often walk into the room and say, uh-oh, Jane's on the other side. But a couple of questions that have been uploaded to the top from Eileen Costello. Hello, partner. You just spoke about the challenge of hitting the reset button to address the complexity of the current planning regime. Based on your experience and knowledge, if you had to make 3 recommendations to change the process, political, municipal, or otherwise, today, what would those be? Thanks, Jane.
Oh boy, Eileen, you're always known for those really tough questions. I think one of the things would be to seriously, and I know this isn't possible, I'm hoping you're allowing me to dream in Technicolor. Simplify the Planning Act. Get it down to, you know, section 14, A, B, and C instead of point 1. I'm very serious about that. It is so dense now that it is hard for people to find their way through it, and we spend more time on trying to understand what the goal is than actually working through it. I think next I would hopefully, there's something called keys to concept to keys that the City of Toronto is getting started on. I just hope that that gets properly resourced and properly staffed and gets actually able to break through the political concrete that sometimes stands in the way of any sort of meaningful change. And I guess perhaps the final thing is that I don't know what we do about councils. You know, we've got the we-they splits. We've got municipalities now that are struggling with COVID. I full sympathy. But as you start to see the inability of a council to work collectively to an outcome on, I don't care what it is. I don't care whether it's transit or development charges or EDCs, you name it, there's always a fight. And if in fact the goal of council is to lead, we're not seeing that in a way that true leadership, I think, that would serve the public and serve the public interest, which includes, of course, getting the right kind of development done properly, is being served. Now, that's my Technicolor list. I don't know how to implement any of those, Eileen. I'll leave that to you.
Here's another great question. You know, thinking back on all your wins and accomplishments, can you recall a loss which you gained knowledge, experience that assisted you going forward? I can remember you and I working together on a project outside of Toronto where we were trying to head down the path of a win, but we ultimately didn't get the win. It may not have been the process, it may have been the development, but what's a great loss that you can think of to share with the audience?
Well, you know, it's interesting. It was when Stephen and I first got together. It was the very first hearing of Price Club Costco. and I was acting for Loblaws. About halfway through the hearing, hired Stephen, who was there on behalf of another party. And in theory, we quote lost, end quote, in that the Costco was permitted to proceed. But our mandate on behalf of our client back then, 25 years ago, was to see if we could even the playing field. At that point, Costco could come in and they were buying industrial land. They were paying industrial taxes. They could go anywhere they wanted because they didn't have to go constrained into a shopping center or the like. And people like the standard retailers were going, this isn't fair. I mean, we're happy to compete in the market, but we can't compete when they're paying 10 cents on the dollar for the land and 20 cents on the dollar for the taxes. And you can all imagine. So it was a hard fought battle. We went through months. We did, I think, the first provincial tour, and everybody, the board included, flew out to Vancouver to see one that was actually operating because they hadn't entered Ontario yet. And we, quote, lost. And what's more, there were some costs awarded, not only against my client, but also against Costco, because it was described as being a knock 'em down, drag 'em out battle. And the municipality was sort of in between getting trampled, was the theory of the cost award. But it changed everything. It changed municipalities' understanding of what that particular retailer was like. It changed the taxation paradigm. It changed the zoning paradigm. It leveled the playing field. So that was a loss, but it shows the impact that process has on public policy.
And it got me a job.
And he did it really well. We had fun.
Next question.
Yeah.
That was good. I'm going to paraphrase this next question, but you talked a lot about advice and throughout your conversation with Steve, but I think one of the questions that I was going to ask you myself was, if you're just starting out, what advice would you give yourself today, or a first-year lawyer, or even someone entering the industry, in our development industry, because we're so intertwined, and while lawyers obviously have an important role, there are so many people on this call that are looking for a nugget and some knowledge on that.
Well, looking back, I'm not sure that I changed my own advice to myself because I may not have paid attention to it. I've loved everything I've done, and I've been so lucky. So what I would do to anyone who's starting out is to find what you love and become really good at it. One of the things I was ruminating on the other day when Stephen and I were talking is how niched and expert lawyers particularly are becoming. And for example, there are questions in planning law or municipal law that people ask me, and I say, you know what? I'm not on top of that the way Leo Longo is, or Eileen is, or Kim, or any of my partners, Trish. So let me refer to you, because there is a deep, deep expertise that is necessary today, given the accretion of regulations and the really obtuse pieces of legislation and policy. So I think I would say to anyone starting out, find what you love, become expert at it. But also to those who are in the industry, don't hesitate to pick up the phone and just ask somebody. Yeah, it'd be great if you retain us, but we're all open to just giving some advice, and a little bit of guidance and direction. We're all in this together. So it really has to be a team, and you can count on different people in the team to provide different things at different times.
That's fantastic. And I think we're going to end on that note, because as we pride ourselves at ULI, always ending on time, the questions are amazing and they will all be answered, and we will certainly post those answers. I also love MOS post of Jane Pepino for mayor. So never know. But I think I'm going to sort of close this out now for the last couple of minutes. And I really want to thank you both. We certainly apologize for not being able to answer all the questions to our audience, but we will cover them. Once again, on behalf of ULI Toronto, I want to thank our special guests, Jane Pepino and Steve Zakem, for joining us on today's program. It was really inspiring, and truly every time I've had the opportunity to get together with Jane, to speak with Jane, certainly during these times over the phone, you learn something. And I think the whole purpose of the Fireside Chat is not necessarily just to think about the history, but the history brings us forward. And the knowledge that you have gleaned over your career, the experiences you've had, the struggles, the wins, the losses are exceptional. And I really want to thank you, Jane, for not just today, but for really being involved. And I know every so often you call me after a board call and say, you know, I'm sorry, I don't think I participated that much, but you always added one or two incredible things for us all to think about. And it really has helped shape not just ULI Toronto, but just listening to the conversation today. You're shaping our industry and you're shaping the future of our industry. And I really want to thank you personally. I want to thank you on behalf of ULI Toronto. And I want to thank everyone for tuning into today's session. I want to also welcome you all to continue to tune into these sessions. While we all thought when COVID hit us that we weren't going to be able to make it work, and my hat goes off to the entire team at ULI Toronto for what they've managed to do. The organization, if you're not aware, is currently the second largest district council worldwide. We are very, very comfortable and continuing to push the envelope, but it's because of you, because of everyone who participates as a volunteer. It's from everyone who participates as a sponsor, and it's certainly everyone who participates as a member. So please join, please bring your friends, and just be a part of the dialogue. There are a couple events up on the screen that will be coming, some really interesting events and very creative events that you should definitely tune into. We are going to look forward to welcoming you again online. We certainly are going to look forward to welcoming you when we can all see each other again. And hopefully this lockdown is going to come to an end soon, and we'll all be able to see each other in great weather. So on behalf of ULI Toronto and on behalf of the speakers, I want to thank you all, but I personally want to thank once again Jane Pepino and Steve Zakem for a wonderful discussion today.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate it.
It was great.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob.
And we managed to end on time, which is a ULI tradition that Les Klein, the former chair, managed to instill in us. So everybody gets a couple extra minutes to go about their day. So thank you all and have a wonderful afternoon.